Happy Friday, everyone. Welcome to Gospel Echo USA. I'm Mike Steiner, and it's October 25th, which means we're just 11 days out from the election. And there's actually a lot more to talk about than just the presidency for those of us who are here in Florida. We're also here to talk about voting on Amendment 3 and Amendment 4. Amendment 4, or the so-called Amendment to Limit Government Interference with Abortion, is actually an extremely radical pro-death measure that would allow for abortion all the way up to the point of birth for any reason whatsoever. And if the ballot measure passes, then it'll be enshrined in the Florida state constitution and will be the law of the land here, so to speak. Amendment 3, the weed amendment, would be for the personal use of marijuana for pretty much everyone in the state 21 and older. So if that passes, things are going to change a lot too, obviously. So there's a lot going on the ballot for Floridians, and no one is probably more qualified to discuss these things than Anthony Verdugo, our guest tonight. Anthony's the founder and executive director of the Christian Family Coalition of Florida, which is, as far as politics goes in Florida, is probably the most influential Christian organization in the state, I would say. So, Anthony, welcome to the podcast. It's so good to have you here, sir.
Thank you, Mike, for having me. Appreciate it.
You're quite welcome. You're quite welcome. Before we get into the amendments, I was wondering maybe if you wouldn't mind sharing, because I'm certainly curious, how was CFC founded? Like, how did that come about in your life?
Well, I'll give you the Reader's Digest version of it.
Okay.
But it actually started in 1995 when I was watching the 700 Club at the time with the late, great Dr. Pat Robertson.
Yes, sir.
And it was actually National Day of Prayer.
Wow.
And he was talking about the state of our union way back when, 1995. That's 29 years ago.
Wow.
Right? And I really felt touched. I felt called at the time to engage and to become involved. So what I did is I called the National Organization of Christian Coalition, and they said call the state, and I did. They said call the local, and I did. And long story short, I worked with them for about 8 years, from 1995, the fall of 95 to 2003.
In Florida?
Yes, in Miami-Dade County, where I was bred and born. And it was, at the time, the only organization in America that had an office and a full-time staff.
Wow.
So we really built it up to have a political presence only in Miami-Dade County. Then in 2003, about the fall of 2003 also, I founded Christian Family Coalition.
Okay.
So
over 20 years ago.
Yes, 21 technically, October of 2003.
Wow.
But when you add the other 8, it's a total of 29.
Wow.
And we work across the state of Florida. We have affiliates in Florida's top counties. And what we do is we work to give Christians and people of faith a voice in their government. We operate a little differently because politics is very nuanced. So what I mean by that is that we really focus on religious liberty as well as life issues.
Yeah.
Now with the emergence of parental rights over the last 4 years, we've really focused on that as well.
Yeah.
I'm a registered lobbyist in Tallahassee, which, as you know, is the capital of our state of Florida.
Yep.
We put out voter guides at election time. I think we're the only ones left now that are doing these, to be honest with you, in the way that we do them, I should say.
Yeah. I know our church members, thank you. They've all asked me.
Thank you.
A lot of them have asked me for one. Been very helpful.
Yeah. And why? Because we prepare these voter guides knowing the quality and the essence of how important it is. Hosea 4:6 says, my people perish for lack of knowledge. So we interview all the local candidates. Right? They're bilingual, English and Spanish. We actually include the questions and the answers. And we have a group of volunteers. And what they do is they interview the candidates. We make sure that there's no conflict of interest. They're not supporting any of the candidates. And we make sure that we recommend those who are the most highly qualified.
Very good.
For the position that they're applying for.
Right.
So we've had that model specifically for about 20 years. And anywhere from 70 to 100% of those highly qualified by CFC actually win. And we do this.
That's incredible. 70 to 100%?
Yeah. We had 2 years ago, the election cycle in the November election, in the general election, we reached 100% for the first time ever. Wow. Yeah, I mean, it's everybody won.
Wow.
Yeah. So what we do is,
I did not know that. That's unbelievable.
Yeah, and we have this model. We've exported it to other counties in Florida, Broward, Palm Beach, for example, and then we're in Southwest Florida. We're in Collier, we're in Lee, we're in Manatee, we're in Sarasota. We just started in Melbourne as well.
So you're just heading north.
Yes,
all the way
yes,
to the top.
the top counties in Florida, and we actually host events as well.
Yeah.
We host a couple of events a year in each of these counties that I've named out. We host a breakfast, we host a dinner in the fall. And it's all about not only just information, but it's also about engaging. It's about making a difference in our local communities and at the state level in Tallahassee.
Well, making a difference for, like, through the church with people that have a biblical Christian worldview.
The church is us.
Yeah.
We are the church, right? The church is not a building.
No.
And it's not a pulpit. It's who we are as believers. And so what's important is for us to raise our voices, because there's a cacophony of voices out there, right? All with different worldviews and viewpoints. We have to make sure that we have a place at the table in the conversation that we call democracy. That is essential and critical for such a time as this.
Yeah, and it's honestly for that reason that I think CFC is so phenomenal. I think everybody can see the sort of craziness that's going on in the culture, American culture, and I think that is mostly attributable to the church being silent, the larger church, the American Christians who we've gotten this idea that the phrase separation of church and state means that we don't get involved at all in the political realm, and it's just had disastrous consequences.
Well, a couple of things. I think we're building a model in Florida for what the church needs to do.
Nationwide.
Okay? Nationwide.
Yeah.
And number two, the separation of church and state is an actual phrase that was coined by Jefferson in a letter to the Danbury Baptists.
Yeah.
And I like to say this every chance I get. Because
I do too.
we
Go ahead.
assume everybody knows.
No, I know.
But
I did too, but they don't. Go ahead.
No. And what he was referring to was for the government not to intervene in the affairs of the state, of the church, rather. What has happened since the 1940s is that phrase has been turned on its head, and now most Americans, many Americans, at least 60%, believe that it means that the church should not be engaged or involved in government. It's actually the other way around.
Yes. He said that because there were a bunch of pilgrims or people who were descended from the pilgrims, and what they had experienced in England
The Puritans.
was the Church of England being involved in church matters, and that's not what they wanted to happen. But you're right. Now it's been turned to, well, anything the Bible says or what God would have to say on any matter, that's fine for you, but stay out of the political realm.
Number one, CFC, we don't deal in political issues. We deal in scriptural issues. So what the government has done or tried to do is to take over the role of God. Right? And also the role of the parents. That's why we have a parental rights movement. But the issues we talk about are religious liberty, life, sexuality, whether it be gender identity or homosexuality, the issues of Israel, parental rights, abstinence education. You can trace all that back to our faith.
Of course.
And so the government should not be intervening in those policy matters. And if they are going to set policy, it needs to be, we believe, consistent with what is best for the whole of society.
Amen to that.
Right? And that's really the fight and the battle that's going on now, because it's really a fight between liberty and license. Right? We know liberty. But what people believe is liberty today, they try to turn it into license. And license really is a form of bondage.
Yeah, and just to go back to what you were saying, when you have a society like ours, which is kind of post-Christian at this point, I would say, and many of the people in the institutions of power and government are not Christians, when you have secularists there and they don't know God, that when they get to high levels of power, they try to assume the prerogatives of God. It's like you were saying, they want to be the ones to whom we're all accountable and make all these decisions that the Bible informs us on. And I think that's what we're experiencing, and I think that's a good segue into Amendment 4, because we're talking about it might be the most radical piece of legislation I've ever seen. I'm sure you're familiar with it. For those of you at home that aren't familiar with it, it is a ballot measure that's going to be on the ballot this November, and if 60% vote yes on it, then it will become enshrined in the state constitution, which is the highest law of the state. The first question I would ask, because people are going to want to know this always changes people's minds, how do we know that it would allow for abortion all the way up to the point of birth? Because they don't write it like that. They're not like, oh yeah, let's have abortions even after, but they don't say it.
You have to read between the lines. I always say with Amendment 4, envision a slice of Swiss cheese. Nothing against the Swiss.
Lots of holes in it, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Lots of holes in it. And that's what this amendment has. Lots of holes. They're called exceptions.
Right.
Right. So it starts off by saying that there will be no law, no regulation, and no prohibition that will delay an abortion. I'm paraphrasing it because I don't have it right in front of me.
It's like delay, penalize, every
Right.
word you can think of to say
Exactly.
you can't get in trouble for having an abortion.
Exactly. So that's, I think, a flawed foundation right there. And then you move on from it, and let's address some of those vague terms.
Okay.
First of all, I'll tell you the Florida Supreme Court should have never approved this.
I agree.
To be
I
on the ballot
I-
because I believe it violates.
Did you read the opinion?
I believe it violates, the law in two ways at least. One is that it uses vague terms.
Yeah.
Right. And secondly, that addresses more than one issue at a time within the document, the whole of the document.
And that's what Attorney General Moody tried to challenge it on,
That's
right?
correct. That's correct. So let's talk about healthcare provider.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. So the amendment starts out with all like 5 different ways of saying you can't have an abortion before viability, which is a row term that means like 24 to 28 weeks. But then we get into after viability, where it says what?
Yeah, but let's define viability.
Yeah.
There's a definition.
Okay.
There's a quasi definition.
Okay.
Definition of viability is that the child can live outside the mother's womb.
Okay.
That's an absolute definition. We know that. Everybody agrees there. But the point of viability, there is no set point of viability. The other side will say 24 weeks.
No,
right?
I should have clarified. From a Christian perspective, at the moment of conception, it's a person.
Well, we know that,
Yeah.
correct. But when,
Has the whole genome. It's a unique
that
individual.
is the whole genome.
Yeah.
Right. But when we talk about actually being able to survive outside the mother's womb, the other side says 24 weeks, which, by the way, 24 weeks is 6 months. All right. So that's criminal already.
Yeah.
All right. But let's operate under the assumption that they're correct. That is already a late-term abortion.
For sure.
That already is infanticide. But the truth is that there is no set definition, and certainly not in the amendment, because viability is determined by whom? The healthcare provider.
Okay. So I'm sorry, I should have been more clear. At our view at Gospel Echo is that all abortion should be outlawed from the moment of conception. I just brought up viability because that's kind of a...
What's in the amendment?
It's in the amendment, but the really awful part, well, it's all awful, but the worst part is after that. They say after viability,
Right.
meaning from 6 months to 9 months.
You can still have an abortion based on, I guess, the discretion or the judgment of the healthcare provider. But it does not.
And what does that mean?
Exactly. Yeah. Statutorily, there are about 47 different definitions, at least, of a healthcare provider in the state of Florida, on the books. I'm talking about our state only. So it could be a massage therapist. It could be a tattoo artist, right?
And
it could be a nurse at an abortion clinic.
And do you recall, it's okay if you don't, but do you recall how the healthcare provider is supposed to determine whether or not that can happen?
It is my understanding that it is at the judgment or the discretion of the healthcare provider based on the patient's health.
Yeah, but it doesn't use, it uses language which in other statutory law throughout the country, basically if a woman comes in and says, I have financial stress about having an abortion, that would be something that would qualify for the healthcare provider, so to speak, to say, oh, okay, you can have an abortion at 9 months.
Well,
literally anything.
That's what I was driving at. That
right.
We don't know what viability is because, and I'll tell you this, some healthcare providers will say viability is 36 weeks.
Okay.
Right? We know viability to be as early as 15 or 20 weeks. So I'm just now running the gamut here. So there is no definition of viability in that regard.
Right.
Number 2, we don't define what a healthcare provider is. Doesn't say doctor or surgeon. We don't know. Then the discretion or the judgment of the, again, healthcare provider is based on the patient's health. Now, we do have some guidance there. The Supreme Court has ruled in relation to abortion that the health of the patient includes psychological or mental health.
Right, that's what I'm saying. So if the woman comes in and just says, "I'm stressed out, the father's not in the picture, I'm depressed, I'm gonna abort my baby," the massage therapist or whoever the healthcare provider is can just say, "Okay,
Right.
and your abortion can be approved.
Correct.
So before viability, they cover that, whatever that means, that's already covered. And then after that, you just have to have some almost, I don't want to say random person, but very unqualified person determine that you can get an abortion for any reason whatsoever.
Mike, there are no guardrails,
None.
is what we're trying to say. There
That
really
is what
are
we're trying
not
to say.
any parameters.
No.
There are no rules.
No.
It's the wild, wild west
And
of abortion.
oh my goodness,
Right?
it's awful.
And then it even goes further because we have a law in Florida right now that took over 30 years to enact that said that a minor unmarried girl has to be unmarried. Minor unmarried girl cannot get an abortion without the consent of at least one of the two parents or guardian or legal guardian, right? Now, in the amendment, it specifies and guarantees that the legislative authority to enact and enforce parental notification will remain intact, basically, right? So parents will be notified. However, it leaves out consent. And so it creates a confusion in the voter's mind because a lot of voters see notification as equal to consent and vice versa, and it's not. Notification is just what it says. You are being notified. You are being informed. You are being alerted. No, before.
Okay.
But you're being alerted. You're being notified. You're being informed. But that's it. That's where it ends. You cannot give or deny consent. In the state of Florida, there's not a single medical procedure that is done on a minor without consent from a parent, except
Killing their baby.
abortion if this amendment passes. And I will tell you that at least 60%, and I think it's higher, but at least 60% of Floridians who were polled on this issue of parental consent, and I worked that bill in Tallahassee closely with the sponsor. We were at every committee hearing. We spoke before the media. I mean, we did everything.
Yeah.
And at the time, an organization, national organization, did a poll, and it showed that at least 60% of Floridians supported parental consent before their daughter can get an abortion. And I don't like to say a minor girl only, but their daughter. I mean, the government is intervening so much so that they're telling you, if this amendment were to be approved, that you no longer have the right to whether to give consent or not to your own daughter. And that is objectionable to the vast majority of Floridians, no matter whether they identify as pro-life or pro-choice.
Yeah.
In Michigan, similar, almost 100% amendment like this, worded like this, was approved by the voters, unfortunately.
Yeah, but I think the threshold's only like 50%. Maybe.
Oh, it's 50% in every state except Florida right now. We're hoping that this amendment is the Waterloo of the abortion movement, right? What I mean by Waterloo is that it loses.
Yeah.
And in Michigan, after this was adopted, the ACLU went to court and told a judge that not having taxpayer-funded abortion constituted a delay. And the judge bought that argument, ruled in favor of the ACLU.
Yeah.
And today, in the state of Michigan, taxpayers are funding abortions, which, by the way, we are not in Florida.
Yeah,
right?
but we're going to be if this passes.
But we're going to be. And the reason I bring that up as well is because well over 60%, 70% of all Americans, again, whether they identify as pro-choice or pro-life, do not support taxpayer funding of abortion. And Mike, I want to say this because I always do. I know this is a Christian program. I'm a believer. I believe that life begins at conception. But a lot of times we don't know who is going to see this. And one of the important things that I like to note is that if you're watching or listening to this and you personally identify as pro-choice, okay, this amendment is still not for you. You still need to vote no, and I'll tell you why. Okay? Because Americans who identify as pro-choice do so up to a certain limit. And that limit could be 12 weeks, could be 15 weeks, maybe as much as 20, but certainly not beyond that. And this amendment allows for late-term abortions up to the 9th month. Now, at the 9th month, at the 8th month, at the 7th month, it's not an abortion any longer. It's called infanticide. and only a minority of Americans support infanticide. So just to, wrap it up, if you identify as pro-choice, if you believe in abortion rights, but you have the chance to vote on this amendment because you live in Florida and you're a registered voter in Florida, we still ask you to vote no because you do not support infanticide. And we know that because we're a civilized society and nearly all voters are against infanticide. So this one is too extreme, even for some pro-choice, I would say for most, if not all, who identify as pro-choice, and that's what's important. Now, we can talk about the current law, which I think is important to address as well.
Yeah. Yeah, but just before we get into that, to the pro-choice audience who may be listening, the reason he's saying that a late-term abortion entails, and I'm not going to go into detail, but the doctor uses Sofer clamps and tears the baby apart limb by limb, and that's how it's extracted, and that's what you're voting on for a child that could be born the next day. That's why he's talking about it. I mean, we believe we're against all abortion from the moment of conception, but even if you're not a Christian, you don't. This is what you're voting for. It's just murder.
I think we have to be transparent about that. And the other thing is that we know that fetal pain is a real thing.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? And so these babies in their mother's womb do experience pain. And we know that because they've developed a nervous system.
Yeah.
And that's where the pain, emanates from and comes from. And so it's important that people know this because, again, this amendment, if we focus only on this amendment just goes too far. Right now, in Florida, it's talked about the fact that there's a ban on abortion. There's not a ban on abortion in Florida. There's a limit.
No.
There's a limit. That limit is 6 weeks.
6 weeks. And if I could just chime in real quick, that's just for surgical abortion. So there's still no limit on taking the pill to have medical abortions.
That is correct. And I think this has been all misrepresented by the other side.
Yeah.
Because
for sure. That was going to be my last question, and I hate to interrupt you, but the last thing I want to do is go through this political ad. It is hilarious. Not hilarious, but it's incredible how dishonest it is.
Deceitful.
Yeah.
But
anyway,
and
go
that's
ahead.
putting it mildly, right?
Yeah.
So the history in Florida has been that up to the last 4 years, we had abortion up to the 24th week or 6 months. Then it was pushed back to 15 weeks, which, by the way, is in essence 4 months. And if it's about choice, 4 months should
You
be
have
more
enough
than
time.
enough time.
I mean, you're
Correct.
pregnant by then.
Correct. You're pregnant and you can sort everything out in 4 months.
Yeah.
It's more than a quarter of the year.
Right.
And then the limit was pushed back to now 6 weeks. 2 years ago, the Dobbs decision was handed down by the U.S. Supreme Court, which says that there is no constitutional right to abortion in the federal constitution, and that each state can decide, which, by the way, was the pre-Roe standard in the United
before
States.
1972, that was...
Correct,
Yeah.
1973. Right, so at that point, states have begun to deliberate on this issue, and all kinds of decisions have been made, depending on the legislature and the governor who's in place at the time. And in Florida, we decided to take it back to 6 weeks. And the reason 6 weeks was chosen, because it's understood through the science, through the advancements that we've made, that that's when the heart starts to beat. That's when you have a beating heart. And so a surgical intervention at that point stops a beating heart. And that's why I believe that 6 weeks is definitely, if you're talking about now legislatively in the political reality, I agree with you. I agree with you that life begins at conception.
You agree with me theologically?
No. I agree with you medically as well, biologically as well.
Yeah.
Because biologists define
life
at the
board.
beginning of conception. So the reason I say that is because we're accused a lot of times, we being our side, accused a lot of times of trying to impose our Bible and our values and our belief system, ram it down your throat. No, science agrees that life begins at conception.
If I could just
agrees
say,
with theology.
Yeah, one thing on that. So at the moment of conception, the human genome is all there in the person that's conceived. And here's what I mean. Your genes are very complex. They're so complex that at the moment of conception, the genes that are in that unique individual that are already formed have more information than what's in your iPhone. I mean, it's a person and it has a soul, and it's the science all backs it. And even all the left leaning science backs it. Even liberal institutions all agree on this. It's not disagreed upon by anyone.
Correct.
So,
The moment of the sperm and the egg uniting.
fertilization, conception, we got a person.
Correct.
But
And
so you're saying about 6 weeks. Yeah,
the science says that. So right now, the standard is 6 weeks in the state of Florida. And if anybody disagrees with that, well, the legislature and the people of Florida, through their elected officials, can continue to deliberate this.
And which is what I want to do.
However, if Amendment 4 is enshrined into our state constitution, there will be no more debate.
Explain why.
It
That's
cuts off debate, because what it does is that it takes away the authority from the legislature.
So when Anthony,
and in turn the people.
Yeah, what Anthony's saying is, so even, okay, if Amendment 4 doesn't pass, then people like me and him and you guys listening, we can reach out to our state representatives and senators and say, hey, let's pass a bill that makes all abortion illegal, and they could pass it. But if this amendment passes, it's going to be in the state constitution, which is the highest law. So you can't then formulate a bill afterwards that contradicts it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, what's going to happen is that the legislature would still have authority to maybe define some of the vague terms. There could be a federal lawsuit filed, but again, that federal lawsuit is a long
legal
shot.
battle. Yeah.
No, it's a long shot too,
Yeah.
right? It's an uphill battle. So what we're saying is, let's keep this debate open by the people through their legislators, and let's not shut down debate. That's exactly, and I know we're not talking about this, but that's exactly what the current nominee for the Democratic Party of the United States wants to do. Democratic nominee for president of the United States wants to do. She wants to kill the filibuster.
Yeah, we're not talking about it, but it's important to bring. Go ahead.
She wants to eliminate the filibuster.
And what would that do?
What that would do right now with the filibuster, you have to reach a threshold of 60 senators, right?
In the federal Senate.
At the federal Senate. And if you eliminate this filibuster, then you go back to a simple majority in order to enact legislation. And what she would do is enact a law bringing us back to the pro-Roe v. Wade standard of 24 weeks or more before a woman can have an abortion. And that would be enacted into federal law for all 50 states.
And the reason Anthony's saying that's such a big deal is because the Democrats will have 50 senators to be able to pull that off, whereas if the filibuster
50 plus one, yeah, or 50,
but
or even 50, because the vice president would cast the tie-breaking vote.
But they wouldn't have 60. So if the filibuster stays in place, they can't get away with that.
Exactly.
So that's an important thing to bring up.
But that's a way to cut off debate. And Amendment 4 does the same thing. So if you do not believe in censorship, if you believe that debate should continue on this issue, if you, even as a pro-choice American or Floridian, believe that we should not have infanticide or late-term abortion, then you need to join us. Even though we may disagree on the issue, you still need to join us and vote no on Amendment 4.
Absolutely. I'm just going to take, there's 4 sentences from, so this is a political ad from the Vote Yes on 4 organization, I believe. And the guy in it is dressed like a doctor and says he's a doctor. I don't know if he is or not, but it's irrelevant. I just want to tell you what you think about this. The first line of the ad is, it's the hardest conversation I have with patients, telling them their baby won't make it. And now because of Florida's extreme abortion ban, I have to tell them I can't help.
Well, first of all, that's a lie.
Of course it's but how does that even make sense? So it's the hardest thing you have to tell them is that they're going to lose their baby, but then it's even worse because now you can't abort their baby? That's like what he's saying. It's so strange.
It's a lie, and what they're doing is that they're trying to appeal to the emotions, not, rational thinking. And I will tell you, even with the 6-week limit on abortion, if you're a victim of rape, incest, or human trafficking, you still have up to 15 weeks, right, to decide what you're going to do. And they've lied about that as well. because they
Yeah.
say there are no exceptions, and there are. And the reason I'm saying that is in the interest of accurate information, not because we support it necessarily,
Right.
but because the fact that voters have been lied to.
Yeah.
And this is a classic example of that. I've seen that commercial dozens of times now.
It's crazy.
It pulls at the heartstrings. It tugs
Well,
at the heartstrings.
If you can't see what's actually happening, it does. The
Right,
sad
because it's
music
an
and-
emotional appeal.
Yeah. And just a small aside on the rape and incest. I mean, if anyone's listening that's happened to you, we will pray for you. That's awful. Our stance is that it would be better to give the baby up for adoption. The biblical view would be that two wrongs don't make a right. You don't as hard and difficult as that is, and we would pray with you and come alongside you and counsel you through that. It would be better to have your baby and give it up for adoption or keep it, but not to abort it, because the baby's actually an additional victim in that circumstance. I would say the father is the criminal in those circumstances. But that, just to get to what Anthony was saying about emotional appeals, for all abortions, all the statistics say that no more than 3% are from rape and incest.
Well, I was just going to say that.
The other 97% are elective. So
The-
when people approach you and say, well, what about rape and incest? You're such a jerk. I mean, that's an emotional,
Here's the thing.
that's a tiny minority.
There's an old saying in politics, hard cases make for bad public policy.
Okay, flesh that out for me. What does that mean?
Well, what that means is this. What that means is that if a woman has been raped or is a victim of incest or human trafficking, they can go ahead and get an abortion. You create public policy around those limited circumstances, right? What you're doing is you're depending on a hard case, which is exceptional. I think among minors it's maybe 1%, right?
Yeah.
And then you're casting a very bad law upon the rest of the population. The other thing I will tell you is we have a law in Florida that if a pregnant woman is a victim of a crime and the baby dies,
double
it's
homicide.
It's
Yeah,
double homicide.
explain that.
Right, explain that. And how is that going to jive with Amendment 4 if it were to be adopted?
I don't know. I knew about the hypocritical standard, but I hadn't even thought about what would happen to that if
Right.
4 passes. The next line of the ad says this: the ban forces women to wait until the brink of death to get care and could send doctors like me to prison just for treating my patients. If you ask them to explain what they meant by the ban forces women to, they mean the current law.
Well, first of all, it's not a ban.
No, but it's not a ban at all. But what do they even mean by that? How does that bring women to the brink of death, the
Right,
6-week law
because
that's currently?
what they're saying is there are any complications in the pregnancy and an abortion needs to happen because of those complications. Well, then the law says that they can't do anything about it and they can't help the victim.
So
That is an outright lie.
Are they conflating what an abortion is with what an ectopic pregnancy is then?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Can you distinguish, or do you want to make that distinction for the listeners? I mean, I know it's a little complicated.
I think you do a better job at that.
Okay. The ectopic, and I could be wrong, but I believe something happens with the fallopian tube that causes a complication and they have to induce labor. Obviously, if the baby died under those circumstances, it would be tragic, but obviously that's not the same as intentionally having an abortion.
No, that would be just an unfortunate result.
Of course.
But it would not be intent, and therefore it would not be a violation of the law.
Yeah, of course. So again, they're just outright lying. And so he finishes their ad by saying, that's terrifying. It's why I'm voting yes on 4 to end the ban so government can stop women from getting life-saving care.
Right.
Have you noticed the theme there?
The theme,
The life-saving theme of the
life-saving care.
abortion on demand amendment?
Exactly. And not only that, he repeats the ban at least 2 times,
Yeah.
if not more, the word ban, which is also inaccurate. And what they're trying to do is that they're just trying to move the needle and get even
Like just to get over the
pro-lifers.
threshold.
Yeah, just they want even pro-lifers to say, I feel so bad and so sorry for the circumstance that we have to vote yes on Amendment 4. And if you do that, you're opening up a can of worms.
Yeah.
Because you're denying, consent by parents. You're forcing taxpayers to pay for it. And by the way, both policies enjoy strong majority support, right? And you're allowing infanticide to take place.
Yeah. Yeah, just awful. So, church, if you're listening, please vote no. And if you're pro-choice to any degree, please take what we said to heart. I doubt very much if that's the the court you're in that you would even want this. And I'm sure if you saw some of the images on social media or TV of late-term abortions, it would definitely be influential in your thinking. So that's Amendment 4. We're praying that it doesn't pass, obviously. Real quickly, we don't have a whole lot of time, but what is Amendment 3? So it's going to allow everyone 21 and up in Florida to smoke weed whenever they want, is basically what I got from it.
So the amendment talks about, it's really recreational marijuana. We have medicinal marijuana already in the state of Florida.
We definitely got it in Miami. Gosh, it's like every corner.
It's cannabis stores. Sure.
Yeah.
And so now this would create a constitutional amendment which would say that recreational marijuana is legal for anyone 21 and over for what they say personal use. It's, I think, possession is 3 ounces. Up to 3 ounces. But again, how are you going to regulate that, right?
Right.
Up to 3 ounces and no more than 5 grams of concentrated in one form or another.
Yeah, but if it's legal, you got no probable cause to see if somebody's got however much in their trunk or whatever.
That's what I'm saying.
Gonna be, and then they're going to sue you, even if they're going to say you didn't have probable cause.
Well, what it does is, in states, 24 states have it already.
Yeah,
including Colorado.
I didn't know it was that many. Colorado and California were the first.
No. Oregon as well, and others.
Yeah. Well, of course, for many, they legalize everything.
Mike, for many, marijuana is a gateway drug to other harder drugs. But let's stay with marijuana and its recreational form and use. According to a study done by Colorado University, it increases usage of marijuana by 24%. Just people who wouldn't otherwise smoke it.
Sure.
Then now, you know what? Now it's legal. All the way. Now it's recreational.
Sure. If you're 21 and you go to Duffy's and have a beer, it's like that now.
Exactly. That's one. And they find in young adults and teenagers who drink will consume even a greater amount of marijuana.
For sure.
Because they're under the influence.
Of course.
If you're a pregnant woman, same thing, right? It's going to harm the child. Science tells us that long-term use of marijuana does create a lot of health hazards, whether it be killing the cells in your brain. And by the way, your brain is not fully developed until the age of 25.
Yeah,
right, to make executive decisions, and the threshold here is 21. It's not 25.
Yeah.
The other thing is that they have found that also has cancer-causing agents. It also will induce cardiovascular problems.
So a lot of health
heart
problems,
disease,
a lot of psychological problems.
So
what do you think about traffic? Is it going to make driving worse?
I would say you got to be very careful now. So in 1965, 42% of Americans smoked cigarettes.
Yep.
Right? In 2019, it went down to 14%. And this is the result of decades, right, of public service announcements and campaigns against smoking. Smoking is now frowned upon,
right,
where it was in the 60s and 70s. And that's a good thing.
And that's with tobacco. And now it's like with weed, we're going in the opposite direction.
It's contradictory, right? It's ironic how we're saying now don't smoke cigarettes. And by the way, not that I'm advocating for it, but you can actually smoke a cigarette and still drive.
Yeah.
Right? Because you're not under the influence when you smoke a cigarette.
Right.
But when you smoke pot, you are.
Yeah. So
we're saying don't smoke cigarettes, nicotine. But now we're saying go ahead and smoke pot. It absolutely makes no sense.
It's insane.
And then obviously there's a lot of money behind this industry.
$100 million put into the amendment.
Right. And we could talk about that. I know we don't have the time.
We could.
But, not that, again, they're creating a monopoly. Right. So it's only going to be a few people who get those licenses.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter because we're against it regardless.
For sure.
But
yeah. So bottom line, Florida, please vote no on Amendment 3 and Amendment 4. Anthony, thank you so much for coming, sir.
Oh, thank you, Mike.
It's been a pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Thanks. Thank you so much for listening to Gospel Echo USA. Please remember to like this video and subscribe and follow us on all of our social media.